Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman, your host for the next hour here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Today is Monday, June 10th, year of our Lord 2019. If you are listening to us live, hop over to YouTube if you're not there, and we have a live chat. Join in. Jeff Johnson, our good friend and producer and co-host, will address your concerns. We'll talk about them on the air. I am finally out of the Facebook correctional facility, so you can send me messages once again, and I can respond to those. We can address those on the air should you choose to send them while we are live. Again, that's facebook.com, Cerberus Radio Network for the network page. CRN is our fan page. Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report on Facebook. Also, those of you who are friends with me on my other page, Suzanne Sherman, I can get your correspondence there as well. If you want everything in one-stop shopping, go to my website, SuzanneCSherman.com. If you go there to the social media bar, our SoundCloud page, our YouTube page, my Facebook page is all there, as are all of my published articles, which thanks to Google are very difficult to dig up. So my articles from the 10th Amendment Center, the American Conservative, and the Abbeville Institute, you can all find there, and my blogs as well. I also have some suggested reading materials, and if you want to go there and order them through the Amazon affiliate links, that will help us out and keep us up in business with Amazon so we can raise some money, get some better equipment, be able to take some phone calls, and we would appreciate that. There's also a donate button for PayPal if you choose to go there and help us out as well. But we've got a few good books there. Let's see, what do we have? The Disaster Preparedness Book for the Family by Arthur T. Bradley. We have The Law by Frederick Bastiat, The 14th Amendment and the Incorporation Doctrine by our good friend and historian Dave Benner, Reverse Deception by our own Junk Bond Carpenter. He contributed to that book as well. So we have some excellent books, including The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Constitution by Kevin Gutzman. These books all range from $2.99 to $24.99. There is not a lot of money you have to spend. And again, it helps us out, doesn't cost you anymore. I also have a MeWe page going on if you can't find me on Facebook. Once again, I'm not impressed with MeWe. I post a lot of articles, so stuff that I don't always put on Facebook will go there. We don't have a lot of dialogue going on, but again, it's a way to reach out, as well as, again, my website, and you can find all of our radio stuff there as well. We've got a lot going on. Jeff, it feels like you and I haven't done this in ages. It's only been a week. I know that you guys did a show with Junk Bond last week and Sander, and then I was on Loving Liberty on Friday because we didn't know you'd be available. So it's good to be back with you, my friend.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, my job has made it very difficult for me to know if I'm going to be around. Now, this week, because of some strategic things on my part, I will have a few more days available. So we will have some shows this week. So, I mean, you can tell people what's coming up.
Yeah, we've got a great week ahead. I have so many stories I want to cover. Tomorrow, Mike Meharry, my very good friend from the 10th Amendment Center, he's a National Communications Director at the 10th Amendment Center, is going to be talking about quite a few interesting things. First of all, he is actually being sued by the city of Lexington, Kentucky, because he had the temerity to seek information on why the police of that city were putting up surveillance cameras all around. So when he requested the information, and he got sued for his efforts. Also, he's going to be talking about a personal friend of his who is a marijuana advocate who is facing 10 years to life in federal prison for violating unconstitutional marijuana laws. Meanwhile, you can serve a lot less time if you rape somebody, 12 years if you throw a 5-year-old boy off the third floor deck in Minnesota. But you know what? You participate in the devil's lettuce, you're going away, folks. The government has something to hide. What is it? What are they protecting? Real criminals are running free or serving short time, beg your pardon. Marijuana law violators are going away. Hard time. We're also going to talk about something that they covered at the 10th Amendment Center coming out of Utah. This is interesting. Our Attorney General Reyes has unilaterally decided to work with a company, I love the name, Liberty Defense, which is going to pretty much impose TSA-style checkpoints at pretty much every public place or private that they choose to in Utah. This is going to have body scanners and their website. They even have a Facebook page, Liberty Defense. I went there, and the only commentary you could see were positive commentary. There is nothing negative that anybody has to say that's allowed to be published on that page, at least when I had looked there. Liberty Defense will be using their technology to scan your body in search of concealed firearms. Concealed carry in Utah is huge. It is a shall issue state here in Utah. Open carry is also available to anybody without a permit. And if you look at the literature and the article that we're going to share with you, you will see that they put concealed carry holders, which again, you have to have a permit to do that here in Utah. They put them on the par, being a threat level, the assessment on a par with terrorists. So this is going to be a really good show. Tune in tomorrow. We're going to talk a lot more about that. We have some stuff to cover here today. A little bit of news out of Utah and some out of Jeff's home state too, in Pennsylvania. Jeff, as you know, last week I went shopping for a new lawn tractor because the one I had, RIP, and I ended up getting a John Deere. But during my travels, I traveled through the little town of Heber. And when we drove through there on the main street, from every single light post was a gay pride flag. Every single one. We just had the gay pride parade also in Utah, I think last week in Salt Lake City. No, I didn't go. I'm not anti-gay. I just don't believe that you need to flout what you do in your bedroom or your lifestyle in front of everybody. That being said, here in Heber City, this is a story out of Salt Lake City Fox 13. A new set of pride flags flying from lampposts along Main Street has led to some debate in Tuesday night's city council meeting. Heber citizen Patricia Thompson says, I have no problem with people's sexual orientation. I have a real problem with it being flashed in front of my face. Again, look at the behavior of these people in the pride parades. They are often dressed. I mean, I don't have to get into that. Everybody knows what we're talking about here. But another woman asked the council, what about acceptance? And this is the kicker here. What about acceptance of my values as a Christian woman? Are you going to fly a flag in support of those of us who are straight? We already know the answer to that, don't we? Going back to the article, the flags were paid for through private funds. No money from the public was used. They are hung on city-owned lampposts and went through the usual approval process through Public Works. Mayor Kellene Potter said she was consulted and gave approval for the flags as a way to recognize a broader celebration of a civil rights issue. She says this is not a political issue. This is an issue about loving those around us, period, according to Allison Phillips, who's the Heber, Allison Phillips Belknap. She's the citizen who raised the money for the flags. Others, like Joey Heyer of Heber City, suggest the flags would be more appropriate on private land versus city property. However, he made the point, the offer to pay for a flag if it had the potential to help save a life of somebody who is struggling to feel accepted. The flags will stay up for their approved period of time. So let me ask you this, Jeff. Just suppose, private funds were used to put up, I don't know, a cross for World War I veterans, a memorial. That bad boy's in federal court right now. I don't know. Let's say private funds in a public park for maybe a nativity scene. Is that not about love? Does Jesus not talk about love and acceptance? Do we not see a one-way street here? Do you have any comments on this, Jeff? I just feel the hypocrisy is just so blatant.
I think that somebody out there in Heber should purchase a whole bunch of Christian flags. They're white, red, white, and blue with a cross on them. They should buy a bunch of those and go to the city council and have them put them up and demand they put them up for their prescribed amount of time, whatever it was that they prescribed for these other flags, because if they can put theirs up, they can put the Christian one up. There's no difference in putting the flag up.
Yeah, and of course, Christianity is always labeled as hateful. And while they say the Bible says homosexuality is a sin, and okay, so what? We're all sinners. We're all sinners, but we elevate one sin against the rest, and we do it for political purposes because we know that the policies that come about from this civil rights issue, as they call it, always lead to greater restrictions, always lead to greater government power. I was just in Salt Lake City a couple weeks ago, and they have Pride Sundays in front of one of the churches there. They don't have Fornicator Fridays. They don't have flags for any other sin or vice. But once again, this isn't about equality. This isn't about saving them from persecution. Who is persecuting gays, Jeff? Who is persecuting gays right now? We don't have anybody. Here's the reason this came about. You know who has been persecuting gays? The government. The government with the ridiculous laws saying that you can't get certain benefits or right of survivorship, for instance, for property, unless you're a married couple. Then the government gets in there and defines what marriage is, gets involved in marriage licenses where they have no legitimate function being. And this whole thing comes about. Remember, the Defense of Marriage Act. Absolutely short-sighted by the Republican Party, and this is, I think, in my mind, this is actually the fallout from the Defense of Marriage Act, and it has come back to bite us tenfold. Get the government out of marriage. No business being there. You've heard about Alabama, Jeff. They're not issuing marriage licenses anymore. This should be happening in every state. Great way to avoid the problem.
Right. It's a religious institution. It has nothing to do with government. The only thing it has to do with government is an opportunity for them in government to separate you from more of your wealth. It's all about money. That's it. Has nothing to do with the actual right of marriage.
Absolutely. Let's move on. You have some amazing developments in Pennsylvania. Apparently now, I think you better get some building plans for your dog's house, because they have now zoning, some building codes for dogs in Pennsylvania. You have anything to say about that?
Yeah. It's building permits for dog houses. Yeah, no. It's one I will plan to ignore if I intend to build a doghouse. We've built one. We still have it, and it's. I don't have any intention to build any more. But if I did, I would ignore their demand for my money to build a doghouse. And that's what it comes down to.
The funny thing with dog regulations, when I lived in California, I had 2.5 acres. I was in an area that was zoned agricultural. Even there in Santa Clara County, with the land I had, fully fenced in yard, I was allowed 2 dogs. 2 dogs. I had 3. If you wanted to have 3 dogs legally, you had to get a special private kennel license. And that would invite the county henchman to come down, inspect your kennels if they approved it. First of all, you also had to seek permission from your neighbors. So could you imagine if you had a neighbor you didn't get along with, and you were perfectly capable of taking care of more than 2 dogs, and you had the power, the neighbor had the power, thanks to this regulation, to not own more than 2 dogs. And then they would come in and inspect, and then it was $100 application fee, which I think you had to pay every single year. So just more insanity.
It's just more reason to have less government. Why we need to decentralize, and that's even at the state level. And quite literally, it might even be at the county level. We need to be decentralizing down into the townships, as small as we can get. We need very little government. Matter of fact, we need almost no government, just enough to keep people from murdering, stealing, basic crimes. And then I'm actually to the point where I kind of agree with our friend Mark Kreslins that I don't even want legislators. I would just as soon have a few judges that mediate disputes among citizens, and that's about it. And then you have just enough law to keep people from murdering people and stealing stuff. And
Well,
that's about it.
exactly. Because every time we get a new legislator elective or they come into session, they have to do something. More laws, more laws, more laws. You don't see them really scaling back. So all of these layers get put upon us every single time new people are elected. And I just don't see this. And we have also tyrants, even in the local homeowners associations, the municipal codes. We've talked about this before, how you're not allowed to grow vegetable gardens in your front lawn. This is why it's so important for people to go and read this. Again, I mentioned it earlier, The Law, like by Frederick Bastiat. It was written in the 1850s as a refutation to Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. Everybody's heard of that one. Everybody hears about that. I had that rammed down my throat as an undergrad at UCLA. Thank you, you little commie factory out there. Nobody not once was that book, The Law, did it ever make it to required reading. Not one time ever. Read this book. It's not a tough read. It's a short book. It's actually more of a booklet. I think it's for sale on Amazon, again, for under $7. Once you realize the proper role of government, you will realize how out of control everything has gotten.
Suzanne, I just ordered it from your website. I think it's under $4. I think it's 3 something.
Fantastic.
I mean, it's hard. And with Amazon, you get free shipping if you have Prime. So it's going to cost you like 3 and change, 330 something or 340 something. It's not an expensive book to buy.
Yes, and it's just so well worth the time to read. So I appreciate your getting that on there for me. I actually got a note from Amazon that said if I didn't get my numbers up, they were going to take away my affiliate link. And as we get our reach going, I don't want to lose this resource. I was also reading about some of the censorship. We're not going to get too into that today, but all the deplatforming, the shadow banning, the demonetizing that we're seeing, if they're not going to outright ban you, they will make it so it's not worth your while financially to try to get these messages of, say, limited government, anti-war messages out there. And they're going to try and silence us. So there's some things you can do. Set websites you like, maybe mine, as your homepage. Regulate what comes to you on a regular basis. So go on Facebook, hit see first. Please do that with CRN or any of our pages, because a lot of our stuff is not getting to people. I'm still hearing from folks, Jeff. How long have we been doing this? 2-3 years now? Oh, you have a radio show? I had no idea. I could put a picture of a chicken up and I will just have, comments for days or weeks, but we announce a show or send a link on the show. People aren't seeing it. They're doing that for a very good reason.
We put a meme out and it'll reach 4,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put out show links. It'll reach 50. So obviously it is being suppressed by big media, by the tech giants. I mean, we know we're fighting it, and it's just something that's why we need you folks to share it. When we share it, you need to share it, because that's the only way we're going to get any reach.
I want to address something that was posted on our fan page. A gentleman by the name of Bill posted this, and I had just seen this show over the past week, and it was called When They See Us. I know how people feel about Netflix. If you boycott every single company, every artist that you disagree with because they're on the left, you're going to be sitting around twiddling your thumbs, folks, or just reading a few select books. So my policy with regards to Netflix or any of these Amazon Prime Video, I watch what I want. And if I disagree with something, guess what? I just don't watch it. But this was an interesting show because I didn't really follow this. I was aware. You remember the Central Park jogger who was brutally attacked. And I think 5 or 6 juveniles, black males, were charged with this crime. And Netflix actually did a movie about this called When They See Us. And excuse me, I've been mowing lawn and out in the grass all weekend, so my voice is a bit scratchy. But here's what he said. He said five falsely convicted teens were black. And he says there's been some racial prejudice involved in the case, but he doesn't want to lay the blame on this for racism as this happens in the system to any and all. The whole tragedy started again with overzealous detectives, a DA. They wanted anybody convicted. And that's what they were saying in the story as well. Now, just a quick caveat. They had what were shown as personal discussions, private discussions among the police and the district attorney. Clearly, we don't have access to what was really said in many of these comments. But this does raise some very valid points. And again, I do know some people that are absolutely convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that these were the boys involved. I'm not going to get into that. There are some really good points that are made here, though, and that is the issue of jury nullification. And this is what he talks about here. Without a doubt, many of the jurors selected to be in that jury pool made excuses to get out. They could have been non-gullible, questioning juries that could have kept those boys out of prison. Serving on a jury could be seen as the most important thing we can do as citizens when we serve on a jury, no matter what the judge or any lawyer will tell you. You are free to, and in fact, it is your duty to judge not only the defendants, but the laws under which they are being tried. It is also your duty to judge the entire system. Show up for jury duty. Be prepared to be the one, maybe the only one, that is responsible for keeping that jury in deliberations until you convince the others that something isn't right. And with the mindset that there is no physical evidence, you are being asked to convict on a story or narrative that has been put together by the system. It is far better to free a guilty man than risk convicting an innocent man and depriving him of his life, liberty, or his liberty and or his life. Now, he also mentions some politics. I think that there was a strong motivation to have an underlying message here that is anti-Trump. And I'm not attacking the movie for it. I'm just saying that I think this was a motivation for them coming about this at this point in time, particularly before an upcoming election year, because they mentioned, we know Donald Trump can't keep his mouth shut on air. And again, he was a private citizen at the time. He put up, I think he spent $80,000, they said, for an ad in the New York Times before these boys were even convicted, saying that they should get the death penalty. I don't agree with what he said. He had a right to say it. But again, to me, it goes to the motivation of why they did the movie in the first place. That being said, I think it was a good series. It was 4 series long, and I think it should serve as an eye-opener, particularly if you look at the fact I, as a questioning juror, if I had been impaneled, you would have known that there were more boys. They separated the trials because, according to this movie, the forced confessions and the recordings were edited to the point where they weren't contradictory had they had them all at trial, done a trial for all of them at the same time. I would want to know why they had separated it and why we weren't hearing the recordings in their entirety. So again, if you are summoned to jury duty, I'm never called anymore, Jeff. I used to be when my kids were little and nursing and I couldn't get out. Now I'd love to serve on a jury. Here's the thing. I'm an attorney, and I'm also considered an officer of the court. As a criminal defense attorney, my highest obligation is not to my client. It's to the court. There was an issue in this story about a piece of evidence that could have been very exculpatory. And again, the DA planned, according to this show, to foist it upon the defendants as a surprise, last minute, so they couldn't deal with it. Again, it was exculpatory, and they chose to hide it. We have an obligation to pursue the truth, to pursue justice. Everybody involved in the criminal justice system is considered an officer of the court. Our clients should be our number one concern here. Doesn't mean I'm saying we should hide evidence that tends to be leading them to look like they're guilty. We all have an obligation to do that. But if you look at the system, you go into a court of law, Everybody there is somehow connected to the government, whether or not you are simply an officer of the court as private counsel or you're a public defender. The prosecutor, they have unlimited resources to go after you. And then the judge, he sits on his bench, elevated above the rest of the people, elevated above the jury. And when he walks in, he or she walks in, everybody, you hear, all rise. Everybody has to stand and pay homage to the judge. Then you're instructed, if you're on a jury, that if the people can show A, B, C, or D, you have no choice but to convict. They never instruct you that you have the, I would say, duty to judge the law as well. Is this law on its face fair and just? Or is this law as applied to this particular defendant being applied in a manner that is fair and just? If the answer to either of those is no, you can say not guilty, notwithstanding the instructions they give you. There's a great book called Jury Nullification by Clay Conrad. And I interviewed him once before. He brings in incorporation doctrine. I don't like that, but there is a really great discussion on jury nullification, what the founders felt about juries. Highly recommend that book. Jeff, maybe I'll put that up on the website so people can read. So that's about all I wanted to say on that. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, not really. I've served on a couple juries. One was settled out, and one we found the guy not guilty. So, I've done it. I don't particularly want to do it again. But the one where we found him not guilty, it was obvious that the person didn't do what they were accused of, and justice was served. We didn't like the guy, and quite honestly, we thought he was guilty of another crime, but they didn't charge him with that. They charged him with a really serious crime that he didn't commit. So it was the prosecutor's fault that the guy didn't get convicted of the crime he did commit.
Before we move on, I want to give a shout out to a couple listeners right now. I believe Robin is joining us. Andrew's tuning in as well. Thank you both for all of your support as well. Let's talk a little bit. When I was on a show with my friend Brian last week on his show Loving Liberty, and I said I want to talk about a continuation of a topic he had. He was sharing a conversation he had with a friend of his who had decided as a testament to his love of Jesus that he would no longer have firearms and he would no longer use his guns that he had to defend himself, his property, his home, his family, because it was more important to show love for his fellow human beings. He said, if somebody comes into my home at 3 a.m., oh, what would you like? Can I give you a book? Would you like some food? I've had somebody else tell me that as well. If somebody broke into his house, he'd say, hey, can I feed you? Can I give you a cup of coffee? Okay. That being said, my first comment was if somebody breaks into your house at 3 a.m., they're not looking for reading material. So I did the conversation, and we're going to get into some stories here also. I have a couple stories about a woman who was carjacked and kidnapped, about a mom here who was held an intruder at gunpoint for 30 minutes. It took for police officers to arrive. And then also a shooting out here in Utah as well. But I want to first just ask people, as Christians, do you think that the Bible instructs you to let others harm you and you're not going to do anything about it? And I remembered this article. It's called Biblical Self-Defense. What does the Bible say about self-defense? And maybe some of the scriptures here are subject to interpretation, kind of like Romans is, to justify anything government does. We hear that all the time. And I'm not going to get really into this article, but I just want to point it out to you that I have it. We put it up on the websites. And they open by saying this study here examines really the biblical view of self-defense. Again, is it right to take measures that might kill an attacker who is wrongfully threatening your life or the life of another? Again, self-defense is defined as protecting oneself from injury at the hand of others. It's not about taking vengeance. It's not about punishing criminals. And what I do is I'm applying this also to what we have is the standard for the legal standard for the use of lethal force, which again, we've said time and time again, lethal force is justified if you have an imminent immediate fear of serious bodily injury or death to yourself or another. I have a couple cases I'm going to discuss today where lethal force was used to save the life of another person. So the article goes into the biblical obligation to preserve life. Psalm 82:4, rescue the weak and needy, deliver them out of the hand of the wicked, deliver those who are drawn toward death, and hold those stumbling to slaughter. They also go into some of the New Testament as well. So if you find this interesting and compelling, go to our sites. We have them up there. I don't know, Jeff, if you wanted to mention any of the passages in particular in the article, you're welcome to do so.
No, I don't want to get into a biblical discussion on it. It's quite honestly, if these folks believe that, then that's fine. I mean, I defend people's liberty. I had this discussion at work the other day. They asked me, "Do you support a family that would say, well, my child broke his arm, but we don't believe in going to the doctor and have it treated?" I said, this may sound cruel, but sure, I believe in their liberty to do as their conscience sees fit. Does that mean that I don't care about that child? No, it's just that they have liberty to live their lives as long as they're not affecting my freedom and my liberty. If they believe that way, more power to them. But I think they're idiots. Yes, but I'm not going to sit there and say I'm not going to use this line. There ought to be a law. No, we don't need more laws. If that's the way they believe, you know what? They believe that way. Get over it. It doesn't affect you.
You and I were having a conversation last night, and I was telling you about a mutual friend. We'll keep the name out of it. I was having a discussion with him about firearms, and this man is he was very much of a Christian and says, I don't know if I would use a gun to protect my life. If it was
And what did I say?
Well, hold on.
Okay.
And I said, what would you do if somebody broke into your home and was about to kill your wife? And the answer was, I don't know. Jeff, go.
And I said, get rid of the gun.
Yes.
Get it out of your house.
If you haven't answered that moral question ahead of time, don't have a gun, because that gun can be taken from you, used against you. You might have armed a criminal that didn't otherwise have one. Recall, I tell this story all the time, the family that was in Connecticut, husband, wife, two beautiful little daughters, two home invaders, broke into the home, brutalized these girls. The mother and one of the girls actually went off with one of the perps and went to an ATM and brought money back. When they were all back under the same roof, the mother, the two daughters, brutalized, ravaged, murdered. And guess what? The intruders didn't even have real guns. I told Brian on his show, I said, good for your friend. Like you said, Jeff, that's your personal decision. But if you have children, if you have a wife, spouse, somebody in your home that is counting on you to defend them, you have an obligation to do so, a moral obligation to do so. Surrender is never an option. It's an article that I have discussed before. If you can't defend your own children, you better take your security maybe a little bit more seriously. Again, don't have a firearm if you don't intend to use it. But that case in Connecticut really is one of the ones that made me decide that I was going to arm myself. And then again, you answer that question ahead of time. I'm going to post this article again, why surrender is never an option. And on my friend Brian's show, I just said, to your friend, good for him. I respect his decision. This is why I take my personal responsibility to protect myself very seriously. And I also quoted the late, great Colonel Jeff Cooper, who said, the only honorable response to violence is an overwhelming show of counter-violence. Nobody out here is seeking vengeance. Nobody's talking about some sort of a preemptive strike. If what was this? I've seen this once before. It said if trouble kicks down your door, light it up like a Christmas tree. We have an obligation, I think, to defend ourselves. And I thought that the passages, again, in that article in Scripture were compelling. But again, I don't rely on them. I rely on what's moral, what's just, and I will defend myself. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There are, however, some legal ramifications when you do so. As you know, every round you send has a lawyer attached, has police officers attached to it, the district attorneys, and the judge, the might of the government. So you better be careful if you do use that. Jeff, I'm going to move to a story that just happened out here in Utah. Would you like to comment before I move on?
Nope, I think we covered it.
All right. When I first started, first I'm going to back up. And I can't, this is so far back, I can't even find this in the quick search I tried to do before we went on the air. But I remember when I was becoming a NRA certified firearms instructor, and I've let that pass because you know how I feel about the NRA. But there was a story out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Jeff, but there was an officer, police officer, that was working a funeral procession, and a gentleman in a Mercedes convertible cut in and interrupted it. So the officer pulled him over. The man had attempted to bribe the officer, and when the officer tried to arrest him, this man came out and attacked him, and he was straddling the police officer and beating him senseless. The officer had broken bones in his face, seriously injured, and they were fighting over the service gun. The policeman was trying to smash it on the ground, trying to jam his Glock, and the man was again straddling him, beating him nonstop. There is a concealed carry man. This was in the parking lot of a store. There were witnesses all around, police officer, perpetrator fighting over a gun. An elderly man who had been severely injured in an accident a few years before came out. I believe he had a cane. And he warned the gentleman straddling the police officer multiple times to stop. Shot him several times in the body. Now, the shooting, I hate to say victim, he was a very large black male bodybuilder who I think they said was suffering the effects of roid rage. These rounds did not affect him at all. He kept pummeling away at the officer's face. Finally, this gentleman took a headshot and put the man down. Now, remind you, there were people all around. Anybody could have been a victim had this gentleman taken the firearm from the police officer. As you can imagine, NAACP gets involved because the shooter and the officer were both white. So clearly there was no other motivation here than racial hatred. DA got involved. They said, no, the shooting was justified. There was absolutely no question that this was a justified shooting. Nonetheless, the officer, the city attorneys, everybody, his defense costs, everything was paid for. This man had to defend himself, cost him thousands. He eventually was planning to leave for the state of Florida because there was so much hatred. When you use your firearm in self-defense or defense of others, be ready for the legal costs, the emotional costs, the financial costs as well, and the societal costs. What's going to happen to you? How are you going to be dealt with in your community by the media? Ruined this man's life. And I was thinking about that when I read this story here, and this is covered in the Deseret News. Despite new details, questions remain, and a fatal Utah passerby shooting. This just happened out in Provo. A 26-year-old man was shot and killed as he had continued to punch and bite a woman, stomped her on the head. A passerby threatened to fire at him if he did not stop. This sounds very much like the other story I just shared with you, does it not, Jeff? Officers released a more detailed picture Friday of the moments before the gunman, who was a white man in his 20s, fatally shot Jeremy Sorensen twice. Sorensen was an African-American, was laid to rest Friday. You know, they use all this flowery speech for the guy that stomped on a woman's head. About the same time, the detectives handed off their investigation to prosecutors who will weigh criminal charges for the suspected shooter. So here we have a Good Samaritan comes upon a man stomping on a woman's head, punching and kicking her. That, ladies and gentlemen, fits the definition of imminent and immediate fear of serious bodily injury or death to another. Nonetheless, this is being passed off to the prosecutor. At 8 a.m. Monday night last week, police said Sorensen ignored several clear verbal warnings and continued to assault an 18-year-old acquaintance before she broke free and ran behind the gunman. Notice they refer him to the gunman. It sounds to me, Jeff, am I being paranoid? Does it just sound to me like they're trying to make the guy who saved this woman the evil person in this story so far?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
He's the evildoer because he had a firearm. The firearm makes him evil.
Yeah, I would call him maybe a good Samaritan. No, he's the gunman. So let's see. He continued. So he gave several warnings, and he saw the two struggling in the driveway of an apartment complex. Detectives say he advanced toward the woman and the man with a gun. It was then that shots were fired, according to the Provo police. Sorensen was struck twice, once in the chest, and was rushed to a hospital where he later died. They have not indicated how much time passed between the warnings and the gunfire. How convenient. How many times have we seen police officers give very little, if any, warnings? Remember that guy in the hallway? I think that was in Arizona, who played this absolutely wicked game of Simon Says. And this police officer just finally was able to get this guy to reach to pull up his pants as he's crawling on the floor before he blew him away. The same police officer that said had "you're effed" engraved in the barrel of his rifle. By the way, this man was not convicted by a jury, but I digress. So the woman was treated for concussion and hip injuries consistent with being punched and kicked several times. Detectives conducted numerous interviews. The investigation continues. Police said they did not say how the woman and the man and Sorensen knew each other. Sorensen's family members have recalled him as a gentle person and suspected the acquaintance he injured is the same person they believe had been harassing him for about a year. Clearly, she deserved to have her head stomped on. 2016 court records show Sorensen pleaded no contest to assault, a Class A misdemeanor out here in Utah, after police said he threw 2 pans and beans at a co-worker at Del Taco in Orem. He resisted arrest, threatened hospital staff when he was taken to be evaluated. Utah County Attorney David Levitt said Thursday that he and his employees will carefully review the investigation. There is no deadline to file possible criminal charges. If I were that guy, I would seriously regret my decision to help this woman. That is very sad, don't you think?
Yeah, because at this point in time, you cannot even help someone else that's in danger for fear of being convicted of a crime. And Steve in our chat says, get some good CCW insurance. There's a lot of people out there offer concealed carry insurance. You know, that's your decision. But I'll put that out there because that was in our chat.
I tell you what, somebody just sent me a link, and I'm going to post this on our group pages and on mine as well. And it is an outfit that will provide complete legal defense if you have to use. Now, here's the thing: if you have to use your firearm in a defensive shooting, does defense of others count? I don't know. So if you do get that insurance, find out what is covered and what is not. But remember this admonition. If you try to help someone else, there are a lot of anti-gun prosecutors and police officers out there, and apparently reporters, who will not view you favorably. Why would they even include statements from his family that he is a gentle person? As an attorney, I always like to look to the motivation of what somebody is saying. Going back to what we talked about with the Netflix show, was this motivated by a desire to illuminate the injustice that these gentlemen may have experienced, or is there really more anti-Trump sentiment behind it? Doesn't really matter. But here, once again, he was a gentle person. Really, gentle people don't assault hospital staff and throw items at coworkers. And then they had to say this could have been somebody that had been harassing him. You know, when we practice law, we always have this objection in court. If something that is introduced or being attempted to be introduced into evidence, if its probative value is outweighed by prejudicial effect. These statements they have here are not probative at all and highly prejudicial against the law-abiding citizen who went out of his way and may have saved the life of this 18-year-old girl.
And I haven't seen a picture of the, I haven't seen this article, so I don't know if there's a picture of the gentleman, but I'm guessing he was a rather large guy, and she was probably very small, an 18-year-old. I doubt she was very big. But, you know, he felt very threatened by an 18-year-old girl. I guess that is all the justification they need for him stomping on her head and trying to, and that when you're stomping on someone's head, that's attempted murder. You're trying to kill them. No other way around it. Period.
Totally agree. So very, very disappointing article. But again, I'm bringing this up to show the extreme prejudice, especially in the media and law enforcement, against those of us seeking to protect ourselves and others when we use a firearm to do so. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about a new technology that will rat you out if you are lawfully concealing a weapon, a firearm, in a public place in Utah. And you will have your threat assessment. They call law-abiding citizens a threat, even in Utah. Want to share? And now remember, the Black Robe Messiahs have decreed that there is no legal obligation to save you. It's up to you, folks. I had a gentleman comment to me. I was in a coffee shop in Park City, and I immediately saw those eyes go to the Glock on my hip. That was before I was carrying my SIG. And he said, are you law enforcement? I said, no, I'm not. You can do this here in Utah. And we had a little discussion. I don't do the snark anymore. I try and educate people. And his comment to me was, well, if a gunman comes in here and starts shooting people, I'll let you save me. Oh, there's a man for you, huh? And what I didn't say was, and this is where we are right now, knowing what I know, and I'm sorry if you disagree with this, I'm not going to save a man. If somebody went up to shoot this man, he's on his own. He has chosen to be vulnerable. He has chosen to think that he is going to be safe because of my efforts, my endeavors, the expense I have gone through to get my training, my firearms, the effort to practice. And he's going to ride on my coattails and hide behind a woman. And then if I were to save his cowardly behind, I'm going to have to deal with the crap like this poor guy in Provo did. No, you're on your own.
I'm gonna just go devil's advocate here, and I agree with your sentiment on this. But once the person shoots one person, now everyone is at risk in that place. So if you're there and someone's shooting this guy, I think you're going to draw your weapon and you're going to shoot the guy with the gun, simply because he's not going to stop with that guy, because he's already crossed the line once. He's not going to stop there.
If I knew I had a good shot and I could make it, I would take it. I will not take the legal responsibility of hurting somebody else. If there was a pass through or something, if I had a good shot and this guy had shot somebody and was a clear risk, would I likely do it? More so if my kids were with me, absolutely. But again, there's the warning I'm giving you. You better beware. It could devastate you financially.
Right. And here's the thing, if someone comes, say he's just coming in there to rob it, he's displaying a firearm. He doesn't happen to see okay, in my case, I'm concealed carrying. He doesn't know I'm carrying. As long as he's robbing that place and he's not shooting anyone, I'm not drawing my weapon and introducing bullets into a building with a whole bunch of people in it. I'm gonna let him continue on. Then we're gonna call the cops. I'm gonna be a good witness, and that's gonna be that. The second he pulls the trigger, like I said, now he's crossed that line. Now he has nothing to lose without in shooting everyone else there. So now I'm going to draw the firearm and engage this person and try to put them down. So I mean, there's a line there. You have to use a little common sense, folks. You're not going to go there blazing guns, in a McDonald's with 40 people in line when someone's robbing the place. If it's just a robbery, let it happen, let it play out, let them leave. Just got to use a little common sense.
Yeah, and there's also a story out here I'm going to briefly cover from the Detroit area. There was a photo that's making the rounds on Facebook where a woman displays her throat crisscrossed with red marks, bruised and lacerated. Bringing this up because it ties in with the story that I mentioned about the gals in Connecticut who went with the perpetrator to an ATM. Woman was carjacked in Bed Bath & Beyond. At 8 a.m., she was forced to drive around the community, including a stop at an ATM to take out money. Suspect eventually ordered the woman to exit the car on a dead end, and he assaulted her with a phone charging cord until she passed out. He left her dying on the ground as he fled the scene. She fortunately regained conscious and ran to the local business to call police. The victims and family and friends are using it as a lesson. Watch your surroundings. See, I take a bigger lesson that not only watch your surroundings, be armed, know when you are alone, and practice, again, situational awareness. Be armed, practice situational awareness, never surrender. This is an article from Why Surrender is Never an Option. I'm going to post it again. This is a phase of surrender when you go with somebody. If they have a firearm, fight. I told you, Jeff, about a conversation I had with the gal out here in Park City. She was mentioning how her brother was forced to get in a car at gunpoint and they had to follow him. They were tracking him where his phone was and finally got some help. This guy could have had a bullet put in his head at any time. I said, why did he get in the car? And she looked at me like I was absolutely crazy. He had a gun. I said, so that is all the more reason not to get in the car, folks. Read this article. We're going to cover this again. Why surrender is never an option. I also discussed, we did a show about this, Jeff, 7 Principles of Personal Defense by Colonel Jeff Cooper. Again, I'm going to put that book actually on the webpage for people to purchase. Here's another story. Again, would the Bible compel you as a follower of Jesus to let this man just wrap a phone cord around your neck and kill you? Is that showing your love of God? Totally your call. If you want to do that and subject yourself, fine. Here's a story out of Florida. Mom holds an intruder at gunpoint. How long did it take the police to get there? Almost a half an hour. Mother of 4. Okay, here's a woman taking her defense of her children seriously. Good for her. She relied on a firearm to detain an intruder as a police response took way longer than expected. Days after being she said, after being alerted by a knock on the door, she noticed a strange person and something wrong with her garage door, prompting her to call 911 at 2:41 a.m. This is interesting. She had a pet pig who began picking up a scent. Folks, pay attention to your animals. They will tell you if somebody is in your home. Very, very interesting side to this story here. She said, I tell the police that somebody just came into my door. He's unfamiliar. I don't recognize him. She waited. She checked the garage and noticed the door normally kept open was closed. She screamed, reopened the garage door, called 911 a second time at 12:54 a.m. I had a gun and I pointed it. I'm sorry, I have a gun and I need the police to show up immediately, she said on the 911 call. This is some very good advice also. Get on your cell phone, 911 speakerphone and let them hear you warning the intruder. She phoned her neighbor who came over, who was also armed, and they held the man at gunpoint. Took 26 minutes. A deputy arrived at 1:07 a.m. They were both thankful she had a gun to protect herself and her family amid the poor police response time. Had she not had a gun and been ready to protect herself or call the neighbors, she might not be standing here, because who knows what would happen, said her neighbor, whose husband went over to help Richards. The local news described her ideal as 26 minutes of terror. Now assume you can't even get a call off to police. Let's assume your cell phone is dead or not acceptable. What are you going to do? Let's assume they are coming and you're not armed. What do you think could be done to you in 26 minutes? What do you think, Jeff? What's the average response time when they show up?
I honestly don't know. It depends on where you are. Out where I live, it could be an hour.
Yeah.
Depending on depending on where they are in the county, it could be an hour.
I've had to call them once here. And trust me, it was not for my protection. It was not for my protection. I saved someone else's life by calling 911. Took them 1 hour. Not kidding. Imagine, let's say let's be really generous and say 7 minutes. What could happen to you or your kid in 7 minutes? And do you really want to risk your time, your life in that amount of time for rescue by an entity that has no legal obligation to save you? Folks, it's up to you. If you want to sacrifice yourself on an altar to show your love of God, have at it. But please don't do that to your kids. You know, I would hate it if a family member of mine did that. I really would. I would feel awful if they just surrendered. Again, this is an article I've interviewed. Larry and Stacy Mudgett wrote this. Why surrender is never an option. Again, I think we have a moral imperative to stand up to criminals. Again, quoting Colonel Jeff Cooper. I'm actually paraphrase. I don't have the quote in front of me, but he says, criminals do not fear police. They don't fear judges. They don't fear juries. They don't fear prison. What we need to do, if we're ever going to be safe, criminals have to fear their intended victims. The only way they can fear their intended victims is to know that we have taken the responsibility to protect ourselves, our families, and others. Do so with diligence, do so responsibly, and do it decisively. Those of you that are anti-gun, you're riding on our coattails, because if we were all disarmed, history shows what happens. Look at the violence in the countries where those have had their guns taken away or severe gun restrictions. Look at the violence in United States cities with the most draconian gun laws. They are the most violent. We had a lot of stuff I wanted to cover today about Donald Trump and the gun laws and his disaster of a choice for the ATF. I think we're going to have to save that for later in the week. But just a quick heads up, he has nominated a gentleman by the name of Charles Canterbury Jr. to be the ATF director. Canterbury has served as the president of the National Fraternal Order of Police, a position he's held since 2003. He is very much against firearms. Interestingly enough, the article cites President Trump's Article 2 power to appoint this man, but they never really discuss the Second Amendment's absolute prohibition, which again is a reaffirmation of its not being mentioned in Article 1, Section 8 for ATF to exist in the first place. Canterbury's testified before Congress in support of anti-gunners like Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Eric Holder. So we'll have a lot more on that. And folks, we're out of time. I want to thank you for listening. I am Suzanne Sherman on behalf of Jeff Johnson and the rest of us at the Cerberus Radio Network. Thank you for listening. God bless you.